Welcome to the Shaman Stories podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Chinvert, and join me as each week I sit down with interesting people talking about their journey into spirit. Welcome to the Shaman Stories podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today with me I have author and writer Jake Borchardt. There we go. Sorry, I know I was going to mess it up. Welcome, Jake. Thanks for being on. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you do today?
Excellent, Jeremy. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast. I'm very excited to, number one, talk with you about my book. And it is a byproduct of my transformational journey that began 6 years ago now. And it is a byproduct of answering my call. And after I completed this first book, which is a part of a series, my second editor gave me a book to read and told me he thinks this would help me. And that book was titled The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell.
Good book.
And you read that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So that book is about the hero's journey. And I realized as I read through that book that my story was a hero's journey, and I had no clue that there was a structure to that. So that really helped me realize that the choices I made, that, my extreme choices that began around 6 years ago, I think, if I remember correctly, I prefaced a little bit in the book of making changes. And in life, some changes require a lot of courage and a lot of faith, depending on, whatever kind of belief or practice you have. But I have a deep rooted faith that God was with me. And I also call that spirit, the Holy Spirit. There's many names. I've researched into different cultures over the years. And what brought forth this byproduct of a book was a lot of introspection and self-reflection, the healing journey, the different ways and practices that I began to cultivate to become whole, to heal myself. I had a previous life. I was 44 around that time when I kind of started making some changes of what unfortunately I've learned is fairly common among many people in many different countries. And that is, some dysfunction, alcoholism, narcissism, just kind of a lot of general things. And I got to a point in life where I found myself kind of repeating patterns and cycles. And I wanted to get away from that. And I stumbled upon some self-help books. The Four Agreements was a very big tool for me, and many other books. And so I just began to start to feel better, change my diet. You know, I eventually quit drinking. I'm sober now, and eventually quit smoking. A lot of kind of common things people do, but it was just a long process. It didn't happen overnight. Now, the vision and what I was shown can happen, it happened instantly. But in this fast-paced world that we live in, depending where you're at in life, it's not always easy to start to make those kinds of changes and finding support and finding your way. And I've somewhat been artistic and creative my whole life. When I was younger, I did a lot of sculpting. I did snow sculpting, drawing. I loved poetry. I had a lot of journaling and writing, but it was more just kind of an outlet for me to kind of put down all this empathic input that I was receiving. So it was a long, arduous transition, but it ended up taking shape and manifest on the outside seemingly fast. And a lot of people didn't understand. And my family and friends. Like I say, about 6 years ago, I ended up leaving my profession of 25 years, 15 of which was as a service manager. I left voluntarily, and I was following all these nudges, and this is all pre-COVID. And I knew something was coming. I wasn't quite sure, and I knew I needed to just get moving, and I wasn't exactly sure where. But at that point, I was equipped with several mindfulness practices that I'm sure we'll get into, and they helped me have confidence and to make those steps despite the external feedback I was getting. So it was kind of tough, but I'm glad I did it. And as we stand here in 2025, if you would have told me 6 years ago that you're going to travel the world, go to several countries, become an author, and find yourself on podcasts talking about your book that's filled with love, inspiration, and the courage to follow that bliss, as Joseph Campbell wrote. And this, like I said, I received his book after I wrote mine. And in my book, little teaser is I talk about the bliss bubble. And I had no idea there was such a renowned author who already spoke of following your bliss. So it was kind of like a synchronicity within itself.
Oh yeah, and there's lots of synchronicity. And before we continue, I just want to make sure I say what the book is. It's called A Feather in Time. Um, it's right there. And I'll put a link and stuff for it in the show notes if people want to check it out. But before we dive into the book, and it's kind of interesting too, with a lot of people I've been talking to, and even myself, like there was this like big shift around 2018, 2019, where people really started to have this weird shift, and then COVID happened, and it's like now the timeline basically is before COVID and after COVID. There's no other timeline. Everybody's just, well, before COVID we did this, and now we do this, and even my own self in 2019, I just had this imprint or this message of you need to move. You need to move now. You need to get the bigger land. You need to get some space. You need to move. And even my wife didn't understand it, and I didn't understand it, but we ended up moving. I got like a nice 8-acre property. There's 50 acres of wilderness next to us. It's all nice and peaceful and quiet. If we hadn't have moved, we wouldn't have been able to afford it once COVID happened, because the prices just skyrocket like crazy. And it's those synchronicities or those messages from spirit, which there's a lot of those in your book. And I do want to get into those. But before we get into your book, though, I want to kind of touch back a little bit on your childhood. It sounded like you might have been the outsider as a kid, or what was life like for you as a child?
Sure. And also, yeah, we'll get into that topic
Yeah.
too of before, after, and during, because I think with the way the world works and how media likes to just move on to the next thing, um, I'm glad I was able to capture a portion of that within the book because we all experienced that, and things were different. There was a different mental um, mindset in general, but we'll get back into that.
Well, I mean,
And as
let's
far
continue that topic now since you're already working on that thread. Let's go ahead and, what I mean, I don't want to jump too far back and forth, but let's go ahead and continue that thread because I think
Great.
it's a good topic.
Yeah, no. It's like, you see what's kind of going on now. I don't watch much of a lot of things, but there are a few people that I follow to just kind of get a handle on what the environment is out there. Because as I mentioned, me and my wife, we travel, so it's kind of important to some degree to have a clue of what's happening here and there. But the mindset, um, there was just as you mentioned, and I agree with you. I've spoken to many people that in 2018, 2019, there was this something was going on, and no one could really quite figure it out. But I think that was part of that. If you've talked to people about that the drip effect of people kind of waking up a little bit at a time, and then COVID hit, and boom, you're forced one way or another to kind of have to realize something. And during COVID, we talked before the podcast here, what do I want to give away or not give away of the book? It'll be tough, but the fact is in that time frame, the book spans about 6 months. There was a desperation in me, worried about what travel would look like. And we did see what did happen. And that was unknown to me at the beginning and during my story, but I could tell the sooner the better to travel. And, for whoever hasn't read the book or knows anything about it, A Feather in Time is the title. And it is a true journey of my travels to get from a tent in Wisconsin in 2020 to get to my soulmate in Switzerland. So travel was pretty important for me to know that I could get there, because there was this pull, that unseen energy, that blissfulness that we knew we were going to be together. And as the world went into lockdown and everything, the mindset was a little different than what people might look at now, because it has kind of loosened back up. And just so many things were going on, the hysteria and the mania with the fear. And for me, it didn't affect me. And I was just looking around going, what the heck is going on here? And so that's why I knew writing this story in a way would be timeless, because now that things have kind of equalized, when you read it, your mind is where it is now, not when it was happening. And there was a lot of things going on. I'm glad to hear that you followed your nudges, and you're sitting in sounds like you're in a pretty good spot over there with 8 acres, you said.
Oh, yeah.
Man,
COVID happened, it was like, "Stay home." "Okay." Like, "Whatever you want, boss, I'll do it." You know? So it's when it happened to us, yeah, it was all that fear and stuff, but I didn't go through that because it was turn the TV off, go play outside with the kids. I didn't have to worry about all the nonsense that was going on and that I was seeing in the cities and people going nuts. It just was a different world looking on TV versus what I was going through. And,
right,
I feel bad for those who had issues during that time, but, for me, I had no obviously, there was complaints, things sucked, but, it would've been a lot worse if I would've been where I was beforehand. Like but yeah, yeah, so let's go back, though, now to what life was like growing up, and then we'll definitely start hitting into this because there's some key points, like we mentioned before we recorded. You talk about some things, you have some, like, almost shamanic type practices that you do throughout the book. So I'm curious what got you to those points. And so
sure.
what was life like growing up, first of all?
Well, when I was very young, um, I grew up in Franklin, Wisconsin, and that is about hour and a half north of Chicago. A lot of people know where Chicago is. And I lived in the boondocks at that time. It's rapidly become a very popular subdivision. I've been back there when I was about, I don't know, 8, 10, 12. I don't remember exactly. We moved from there. And then my life, I kind of bounced around different apartments. My parents divorced a couple times each, and then I ended up going to a private high school, which is mentioned in the book. And hockey, I guess I can use as my kind of my leverage, my structure. And I began playing hockey when I was about 8 years old. And as I grew up, no matter where we ended up moving, no matter who each of my parents were with, there was always hockey. So that was kind of key for me to have something that was constant. And I became pretty competitive, and I played at a private high school and ended up playing junior hockey in the USHL. And I had no clue. I guess growing up, I kind of lived in a little bliss bubble, so to speak. I grew up in the woods. There was a pond. That's where I improved my hockey skills. And my father taught me how to hunt, how to fish, how to be in nature. So I guess to start to answer part of the question here with shamanic ritual, I had no clue what a shaman was, any of the rituals. Um, we had a garden, very young. My grandparents lived across the street, and I remember them canning food.
Hmm.
I remember a meat grinder at the table. They had chickens. So we didn't live on a farm, but I had that influence. So I got to feel what and where food came from, kind of the life cycle, to see the harvesting of food, the hunting of an animal, the catching fish, and it was sacred. My father, rest his soul, taught me and showed me the beauty in hunting and fishing, and to have gratitude, to be one with nature, to understand the blessing that it is if it's needed. And for a portion of my life, I have one son. His name is Anthony. He's mentioned in the book. He's 25 now. And when he was very young, at that time, I had my own construction business doing home remodeling, and hunting truly was a source to provide food. And I'd go up with my father. I have two brothers, and we'd go hunting. And it was just a very sacred gathering. And of course, there's, have your beers and things like that. But that came second. The first thing is to be prepared to hunt, to get up early, to get out there in the dark, to learn how to navigate, learn how to be in the woods, and learn to confront fear. Because I had hunter safety when I was 14 years old, and here I know how to shoot a gun. Now I can shoot a bow and arrow, and you're shooting at targets. But it doesn't really teach you what it's like when you're put into the woods. And when you're with your dad and he's showing you to a tree stand or where a good spot might be, that's great. He's still there. But when you go out for that first time hunting and you're with yourself now, and you have to remember how to get there, and it's cold and it's black and it's dark, that is where I suppose some of my practices began to naturally take shape, because you had a weapon to self-defend if needed. You had a knife, you knew how to use it. And then as you moved through that hunt, getting and having an animal come to you and to properly harvest it, it's a lot of work.
Mm.
And so I was able to discover what the honor really was in that, and to realize how grateful to have meat. Like I said, it's a lot of work. And then you bring that carcass back after you field dress it, and the smells, all of the really animalistic parts of life that, as far as I understand, it is a way humans have always been. And so I got to take part in that. And that was one side of it. And the other was the gardening. Moving up to me having my child and hunting. And I also had a garden, and then to watch food, take a seed, and, prepare the dirt, add the water, you have the sun, and you watch it grow. And then if you're blessed, you're going to get a harvest. And that one little seed can turn into many, many vegetables or fruits. And then to can that, a lot of these kind of things that are slowly being erased from uh, a mass population, but it was something I remember in traditions my family still carry out. Um, Canning sauerkraut, for an example. canning beets. We have a family recipe. And so between hunting, fishing, and gardening, providing, just actually having hands on and all the little subset skills that are needed in carrying all those things out. So, um, one of my favorite things to do was at the end of a season in the harvest is after my garden was spent. The leaves fall, all that kind of stuff. So you rake all that up, and I'd go through the garden and get all the dried up stalks of one season I grew 4 rows of corn, and so I had all these stalks and green beans and all the leftovers. And for me, I would have my own little fire. I loved having fires and just being at peace. Wisconsin can get pretty cold, so when those beautiful Indian summers would start to come in, I could tell I was going to be cold, and I would have my gratitude fire, much like harvesting an animal. I would have my food brought in, prepared, and then here's the leftover from the garden. And if people would have maybe been witnessing me, I would go out. I'm talking to the ground, man. I'm having a fire, and I'm thanking the ground. I'm doing some fun stuff, And to me, it was just part of me. And then, as some of my relationships, my first marriage didn't work, and eventually getting to the waking up and self help and learning about Reiki energy was kind of one of my gateways into the whole realm of chakras. And one of my sifus, because I took up qigong, that's a breath practice, and kind of like Tai Chi.
Yep.
He said, "Hey, Jake, you're a shaman." I was like, "What do you mean? What's a shaman? What are you talking about? I've heard the word. Aren't they like, evil spirits or something?" He said, "Oh, no, no, no." And then he said, "You remind me of the Quiero." And then he told me about the Peruvian shaman called the Quiero. And this was after I read about the Toltecs from the Four Agreements.
Hmm.
And then I went, okay, well, but for me, I'm just being grateful. And he said, "Yeah, that's a big part of it." And it was the fire ceremonies what I would have, and I would wrap things up. And then I learned that that's called a despacho. I had no idea. I was just kind of doing these things, and it was, as you've already mentioned, spirit. I was being guided and nudged in these directions to do some of these things, and sometimes, and mostly, it was private. And maybe if I would have friends over, I wouldn't do that portion of it because it was something intimate for me to give thanks and be honored by the ground that would produce fruits or vegetables. The same with hunting. I went from a hunter when, I brought up that there was a point where I needed the food. And then later in life, I didn't need the food. I had a better paying job. So I went hunting, and now if any of my family watches this, I haven't hunted in many years now, but the last couple of years I hunted because I was very accustomed to the land. I became kind of an elder in a way. And there was a new generation of kids coming up, my cousins' kids and things, and even my son. So I became more of a scout and more of a watchdog, making sure everyone's accounted for and that kind of thing. I would bring my trusty 30-30, but I never planned on using it. I had my camera. And one of my favorite experiences, which is similar to another one that's in the book, and you'll have to read it to find out in the book. But I remember my last year hunting. I was a tree stump guy. I would stand on tree stumps because I like to move around a little bit because I would get cold. And I had my camera, and it was before I would know what the word breath work was. I mean, everybody knows what breath work is, but the practice of that. I was doing that to stay warm. And then I started visualizing a deer coming to me. And then a deer came to me. And it wasn't that the deer got within 10 yards of me and stopped and just started looking. And I was in full inhales and exhales very quietly. And I felt like I was the tree. And this deer was just looking. And then I went like that. And then it realized there was a human there and it jumped up like a rabbit and just kind of bounced away and stopped and looked back again. And it was just this moment where I saw into that deer, and it was just such a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Yeah, that's interesting too because I do hunt myself. I don't do it all the time, but every now and then I also raise my own animals and stuff now too. And there is that sacredness when you're working with the animal, especially and that's the one misconception I think people have about hunters is that, "Oh, they're just out there killing animals." It's like, no, we want them to live. We want that balance in the ecosystem. We want to give thanks for their life and their sacrifice. We want to make sure that the forests are taken care of. We want to make sure there's harmony all around because if there isn't, then they're gone and then we don't have that connection either. And that's one thing I've learned through my own practices too is you mentioned the Quiro. That's who I got a lot of my training from was the Quiro down in Peru. And they believe in
Mm,
something called Aini, which is basically balance. Everything's in balance, everything is equal, and we're all in Aini with each other. We're all in like respect and reciprocity with each other. And that's the thing that we try to strive for is finding that balance in everything. And it's yeah, whenever even now when I raise chickens for us, if I butcher one, it's like I give thanks to the animal. I thank you for its sacrifice. Thank you to the Pachamama, Mother Earth, for helping me raise these vegetables, like giving thanks and
mm.
gratitude as much as you can along the way. And, that's the best we can do. We're not going to go back to this hunter gatherer society anymore. So, how can we take some of those methods now and the way we live and get that harmony all the way around? It's a challenge, but it's something I think we all need to strive for as best as possible. It sounds like you did that. Especially with the deer because you became the tree. It didn't recognize you as a human.
Yeah. No, connection is gratitude. That's when it's cold and you're in a warm bed, it takes work to go out into that cold. It's not always fun. The other thing I learned too was to become nature and to cold or warm, um, sunny or rain, windy, and to just experience all that, to hear, to listen, and to realize how noisy and loud vehicles are, people are, and where we're staying right now, we're away from the busy areas, and it is so quiet here. You can hear roosters in the morning, a mile away, and so it's very beautiful in the harmony. I like that you mentioned Pachamama. The For me, when I started reading about the Kiro, I read words like that, and I'm like, oh my god, this is cool. I'm cool now. But it wasn't written for people to be cool. It was just
Right.
the names of things, and I've come to another understanding too with language and communication. And traveling has really humbled me to be able to at least show an effort. An example now being on Crete, they speak Greek. And with German, I learned a few years ago, it at least uses the same alphabet as English. Greek doesn't. So, um, learning that has been very humbling. And just because you might not be able to know a language doesn't mean you're stupid. And I remember younger, I mentioned I had a construction business and we were doing exterior home remodeling. And I remember at that time, a lot of the drywall crews were big crews from Mexico. And, they were speaking Mexican and Spanish. And I always thought it was cool. And I knew a little bit of Spanish from high school. So when other tradesmen would start giving them shit because maybe they didn't speak so much English, I always thought, man, you cut them some slack. They're just working, doing the same thing you're doing. When I see karma wise later in life, now I'm that guy that can't really speak the language, and I was always kind of treated pretty well. So I feel like that it's kind of another topic with karma and all that stuff. But Pachimama, harmony, and Wisconsin is full of First Nations, and it wasn't until a little after I started diving into chakras and learning about shamanic work, being attuned to Reiki, became a Reiki master, and had some clients that I always loved drums. And then I started looking into the indigenous and the Native Americans of Wisconsin, because near Milwaukee, the Ho-Chunk are there. And I grew up with it. So it didn't really, um, I didn't really understand what that actually meant. And we ended up coming back into the United States. And I had that perspective after being in Europe of, oh my God, I want to learn about my country. And, growing up, you don't learn too much about the Native American culture and European conquest, the Reformations, all of these things that I've kind of, just had my own interest to look into to kind of make sense of everything. And the drumming was so amazing. There's some a teaser towards the book too. That's I'm involved with that, and I believe it's similar to hunting in one respect, that it is about harmony and is it about gratitude to share that music, to share that song, and you're playing from your heart. That is one thing I know for certain with all cultures. When you're living from your heart, they will feel that, they will know that. And drumming was always a way for me to not only connect meditatively, to get my own space, but also to give thanks. And there was a time I was in Minnesota, and there was a guy from Brazil. He was fishing. I didn't know he was from Brazil at the beginning. And he's just fishing by this river and wasn't catching anything. And he has no clue. But I had my drum with me, and I went, and my wife was sitting on a stump. We were in nature, and just all by myself. I'm just wishing for this man. You catch a fish now. You catch a fish now. And I'm boom, 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 boom. And then sure enough, he caught a fish, and I was just so happy. And I just kept drumming, and he just turned around and was just all happy. And it was those little silent moments that who knows if I had anything to do with that, but he could tell that we were happy for him. And then he caught a few more fish, and then he left. But drumming's always been something in my heart.
So with that, did you start integrating with those tribes and learning from them, or you just kind of like, how did you fall in with them, or did you at all? I guess.
Yes. Um, we went to a museum in Wisconsin Rapids. This would be 2023, I believe. And I don't remember her name. I do have notes. I'm an avid note taker. My journaling has turned into basically telling a story every day of whatever, because it's practice for me, because it keeps me in that voice for the other books I'm writing. So I kind of narrate my own life. So at that time, we went to a talk, and this woman was from the Ho-Chunk tribe. And I learned that the Ho-Chunk were actually a branch from another tribe that I don't remember. That's why I say I have notes of this stuff. I can't recall it. And they were in Delaware, in New York, and Massachusetts when the Europeans first came in. And so this this woman was explaining, and they're in Centralia by Wisconsin Rapids. That's in the central part of Wisconsin, and she just explained the history, and I really got an understanding of how the culture still survives. They still have their language, but it is so small compared to the size it was. And they said that they've been at war with the federal government since the onset. And it's always reneged on whatever treaty they've ever put in place. And you can see that with many tribes,
Yeah.
and kind of that the conquest, to take the land over, and they had superior firepower and things like that. So I guess it's my one of my friends, which I agree with, says conquest is unnatural. But I very much then understood many things, because she recalled, because they have oral tradition on top of their written language, and their tribe, their men, their women, and sometimes children were put on train cars to relocate. And if you think of World War II, you can know what that actually meant. And I had no clue. And she said it's the blueprint. And then when I connected the dots into 1930s and 40s, I was like, oh my God. So it really just blew me open a lot more than I ever expected. And I was so thankful. And like I said, their oral tradition really, really showed me the power of the word, and the power of gratitude, and they are still surviving.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there that they definitely don't teach us in school, and it's one thing we learn when we get older. But it's, even I think in Canada, I was reading a book recently about how they were taking the kids and taking them out of the villages or the tribes and putting them into like Catholic schools, basically, not letting them speak their own language, cutting their hair, trying to make them
Mhm.
conform. And a lot of them just started going crazy, basically. And then they became alcoholism and everything, just completely destroying a lot of these tribes, and it's horrible when you actually dig into it and see what really happened versus our textbook of, "Well, yeah, we bought some land and we just pushed them, and worst thing that happened was this Trail of Tears thing," and it's like, there's a lot more to it than that. Way
Oh
more.
man,
It's
you're
sad.
you're educated. Feel of tears. I've
Yeah.
touched into that stuff. I kind of dive around. Like I got to Europe, and I I couldn't help but look into the Reformation, and I went, well, what was that actually? And so I learned about some of that, and the whole religious conquest, and it's ongoing, but just I think the consciousness shifts over time, and kind of this repetitive um, domination cycle with different subject matter as the forefront to overtake.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole 'nother podcast in itself too.
Right.
But let's continue on though with your story. So I want to start touching into the book again, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, because I know we don't want to give all of it away. But in the beginning of the book, you're homeless, you're living in a tent. How did you get to that point? Like what was that shift? Because it sounds like you had a good job, you were working, everything was going great. And if you can get into it, what got you to that point where you were literally living in a tent in a park with a pickup truck, and I think you had, like, 3 or 4 bags of stuff and a drum kit, that was, like, all you had.
And Charlie.
Yeah, and the dog, yes, yes.
No, great question. That is the result of my extreme choice making from waking up and knowing I had to move along. Now, it didn't become that I was homeless. That was a choice. Um, a month before me in that tent, I was in a family cabin. But we'll back up a little bit more. I did mention some of this in the introduction.
Mm.
And that, I believe, is also, you can sample that through Amazon if you look up A Feather in Time. The preface and a part of the introduction is there. And it was the result of, I believe, about a year and a half of already traveling. I ended up leaving my state and my work with the items I had. The house my son took over, and that didn't happen overnight either. That was probably a year's worth. Kind of started in 2018. I had this very, very vivid dream, which is indirectly mentioned in the book. I have another manuscript I have to work on. It's a lot more short than this book, A Feather in Time, but that's called One of Them. It is mentioned because I actually wrote it out while I was traveling in A Feather in Time. But it was a very vivid dream I had, and that's what prompted me. Much like you mentioned, you had some nudges, some sort of guidance of some sort to get moving, and you and your wife, you weren't exactly sure, but you knew something. And I had a very similar dream of that, where I had to get through this shimmering window, and I got out, and I seen this line of natives, is the best way to kind of describe it. As it was a very vivid dream, and there's all these animals in these carts, and they were moving along this path, going somewhere. I didn't know where they were going, but in the dream, I knew I'll just go with them. It's better than where you came from. And it was all dark and musty and steel and very robotic and stuff like that. And that was 2018. And so I realized, kind of what am I doing with my life, and started reading some books. And I realized, I'm at The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. I read his book, and I'm like, oh my God. And then The Four Agreements. And then I read a book called Understanding Narcissism. And then I started to kind of see my life a lot differently. And I knew I wasn't perfect. Well, I'm going to do my work. I'm going to start to minimize some of the things I'm doing. I never was very full of material things or had a lot of clutter, but I started minimizing. And I knew I was going to leave. I wasn't sure where. Well, then I ended up going to Florida. There were some people down there. And the idea at that point was maybe to do like a community of some sort. And, let's start some kind of community and be off grid and all that kind of stuff. And it was a great, awesome idea. And then I began to learn that people aren't exactly who they may appear to be through social media. So that's a lesson. But I did also meet some really cool people. And then I ended up going up to New York and um, up into back to Wisconsin for a little bit, and then up into Canada, and then the lockdowns hit. Um, so then I left Canada. At that point, I was working in a healing center, and they had crystals, and I hosted some drum circles. It was more of meditations. Some people showed up, met some friends, and it was kind of me stepping into this new profession, if not even as a profession, but just me stepping in as service. And my message then and now is the same: to clear the fear and free the dream, and to work through those mental traumas, to work through that. And for me, meditative music, breath work, qigong, having a routine, journaling, you know, being in charge of your own energy and taking control of your day as much as possible, but still leaving room to allow and surrender to the flow that spirit's going to guide you, to always be listening. It's not always so easy. So drumming really helped for me. And the lockdowns came, and then the owner of the healing center um, said it's closed. And I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do here then? I guess I'll go back to my country at least. And, so from Saskatchewan, there I go. My cell phone wasn't working. I'm driving through Saskatchewan. It's -11, -20 Celsius. I'm with my dog. And then I just knew to go towards home at least because I didn't, I'm sure my family and friends will have a different opinion on this, but I don't believe I burned any bridges. I was just making choices that people thought, you're nuts. What are you doing, man? You had a good job. What are you doing? And it was like, I can't really explain that. I still can't. I just knew I had to do what I had to do. And so I get back into Wisconsin, and then the lockdowns were already in effect. And I had a ticket to go to Australia because I was invited to go there from Canada. But 3 days before my plane would have left, lockdowns came. So, all right, change of plans. And now you're going to go. Wasn't sure where. Went back to Wisconsin. And I was staying in a family cabin where I hunted. But I was by myself with just me and my dog. That was the beginning of COVID and the end of March or March 16th, whatever day it
Yeah,
was.
something like that.
And the deli job and some of these things, the tail ends of that are mentioned at the beginning of the book because it's very lifelike. It's very real. It's taking My book is about taking all of these teachings, whether it's from Buddha, the Kiro shaman, the Bible, the Koran, whatever your belief is, but it's put into form. We have all these beautiful memes. We have all these beautiful, wise people and philosophical people. You'll see that, I do it myself. I'll put a picture of my face with something really cool I think I wrote that hopefully it can inspire someone and help them along their path. There's many of us out there all over the place. This book is about being that and walking through life in that in the 2000s. And in my particular case, it's during COVID. And you got crazy stuff happening. And here's this guy walking around with this blissful feeling on his way somewhere. And it can seem like a fairy tale, but I lived it and I was embodying it. And it wasn't always easy. And so I technically was homeless for a period before I began my journey towards Switzerland. And it was a choice. I was in a cabin, I was working at a deli, and how much do I want to give away? A dream, another dream, very vivid, and a voice,
Mhm.
like an angel, told me, you will always have what you need. And there was these visuals. And I did my best to describe this because I am very empathic and I wanted to share the raw, authentic experience. I believe that many know what that feeling is, the goosebumps, the pinpricks, the warm flashes in the waves when you just know something is right. It clicks, it fits. I think many people know what that is. And that is an element that's throughout my book because that is how I live and that is my navigation system. That was the transformation of going from I think I know what I need to do, and it is the thing that I was told and taught to do, and then transforming to what do I feel I need to do, and what is being shown to me. I am listening, I am here as an instrument, navigating the vibrational rhythms, the feeling of things.
Yeah, and that plays out a lot for you too, because those couple years where you were traveling around, meeting all these different people, getting out of your quote unquote old life into your new life, all of that played a role within your journey because at some point, and that was the thing that struck me the most within your book. It was like all of a sudden someone would just show up and say, "Oh, you need this here." Like, "Oh, I had this weird message that I was supposed to show up at this place at this time, and I guess you're the person I'm supposed to be talking to. What do you need?" Type of thing. And they didn't understand it either. And you're just like, "Oh yeah, I'm looking for this." And "Oh yeah, come with me and I'll take care of it for you." And it's like, at some point you're reading and you're like, "Did this really happen?" You know what I mean? Because there was so much they weren't even really synchronicities. It was more like things were just handed to you in a way to keep you moving, and it wasn't even random coincidences. It was just things showing up for you. It's like, "Oh, I need a place to live. Hey, fly out here. Here's a plane ticket. Come stay with me for a while. Oh, okay, now you're done here. Come over here. Let's do this." Or at one point, you were in this really bad work situation in Hawaii, and it was like, "Oh, I can't do this anymore. I need to get out of here." And then all of a sudden, the next day, someone's honking outside going, "Hey, I was told to come get you." Like, just random things like that kept happening to you along the journey. And that's where it was like you could see it was spirit led. It wasn't just synchronicities, which I mean, you could say synchronicities can be spirit led too, but this was more like a direct, go here and help this man. Go here and do this. Go here and, you'll figure it out when you get there type of thing. And things just kept opening up for you. At one point, you had a choice. I think it was Colorado or Hawaii. And he went to Hawaii, and I'm like, "Why wouldn't he go to Colorado?" Because that's where the flight he was trying to take the first time was going out of. I'm like, "Why would he not go there?" And you took the Hawaii route, and then when you're reading more, it's like, "Oh, okay, that makes more sense now." But it's like, there's parts like that where it's like, it doesn't make sense that he's doing this, but then it all just kind of flows together at the end.
I love that you're picking up on that because that's why I had to write it. It became too obvious because there were too many examples. And that I hope readers will realize is, I guess, a reward for surrender. And I don't recommend people to just abruptly leave whatever life you're leaving.
Hmm.
Um, if it's guided to be that way, then yes, follow the guidance. Because when I look back, I am even amazed at how things happened. And that was why I knew I had to write this, because there were too many examples that were so plainly obvious. And mind you, we can touch too to the mindset. Now you have to remember at that time, there's lockdowns, there's fear. While I was traveling, you're supposed to have a mask everywhere you go. You're supposed to stay 6 feet away. There's this whole different environment for anything that you did. And yet, these amazing things were unfolding. So I was very frustrated, to be blunt. And a lot of my notes, because as I mentioned, I write every day. A lot of my notes, I wasn't writing notes because I'm going to write a book about this someday. I was writing notes because it took a lot of energy to keep balance, to keep focus, and to stay positive. Because the world was only going into lockdowns more and more, and it was only getting more strict. And here I'm believing and knowing I'm going to travel to Switzerland. And it was very, very hard to maintain vibration. But yet the moments in the book are like basically all of the bright spots. Because I thought once things unfolded, oh my God, I don't want my book to just be a bunch of bitching and complaining. Everybody already had enough of that. What I wanted to do was to celebrate and to give thanks. This book, indirectly too, is a thanks to every single beautiful soul that assisted along the way. That I know, and I have a friend who is in the movie business who is looking at the manuscript, that this can touch and inspire people. And this should be the ultimate thanks to those that extended rooms to me, that extended money to me. No one knows. They know that they did it, but it happened. And I would be so blessed that they would be able to see their giving and their story put onto a screen. Because this kind of a story, I believe, touches many people's souls and inspires them to take their step, whatever that is, in the direction they feel they may need to go, or to make change. If you're struggling with alcohol or addiction, or if you're in toxic relationships, that there is hope. But you have to make those choices, and people show up out of nowhere that you never would have thought of. And it was because you made that choice and remained committed. There is a magical power that happens that is unexplainable, that I have no words for. It's only experience. And this book is a way for me to do my best to show it. As fantasy as it sounds, that stuff happens. And I've had people who have been included in the book who have read it and said, "Oh my God, you did a good job. Thanks." You know, because they're reading about them. And then and I did my best that I'm representing those interactions as authentic as possible. So if any of these things in there, if anybody you read and you think, "Oh, that didn't happen," give me a call. I would love for you to call me and say, pinpoint that experience you say didn't happen. I can give you that person's phone number and you can call them up.
Yeah, and I think knowing too that all this happened during COVID's important. I mean, obviously, you talk about that in the book, but just now looking back into it when you read it, because that was your problem was you're about to fly, regulations change. You're about to go here, regulations change. And you're like you're kinda just, like, dumbstruck each time because 'cause you're like, "Oh, I'm ready to go. Here's my money." And it's like, "Oh, where's this, form 2456, B78?" And you're like, "What are you talking about?" And then you have to
Uh,
refresh the internet, and it's like, "Oh, now there's this new form you need, or now you need to go through this type of paperwork." And you're constantly battling that or getting I think your biggest one was, like, getting your passport certified copy and this and that, but like you said, you had all these notes, and it came in handy because at one point, they're like, "Well, do you have this?" And it's like, "Well, we spoke on this day at this time, and you said this is all I needed." And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah,
uh,
right." And then they were able to help process you on that spot, and it's like, your note taking was crucial, I think, especially towards the end with what you needed to get through it all, and it's
yeah, it's an important factor. Some of those things are kind of common still with other aspects of life, international travel, visas, that kind of stuff. One hand doesn't always know what the other hand's doing. In some of these organizations, when you're interpreting instructions on, whatever thing you're trying to accomplish, then you still have the human element where you're dealing with a clerk of some sort. And if they say they think it means this, even though you read it and you thought it meant that, it can get frustrating. So I think people understand what that is. It was just amplified tenfold because people they didn't know how to handle some of this. So I did have empathy that many workers were just manning their position and carrying out that ever changing rule. The rules were constantly changing. So it was, like I said, it was very frustrating. But along the way of that, beautiful things ended up somehow unfolding anyways. And it just became, in a way, a giant lesson for me to always know to remain patient, as tough as that may be, depending whatever that circumstance is, and that you will always be taken care of, and to be grateful in any circumstance.
and with that, so I guess that's a good point to fall on. So when you're having those, like, severe doubt moments, whether it's living in your truck or the tent, trying to get money to buy a plane ticket, to that bad working situation, you didn't really touch on it too much, but, what was kind of your process? Was it more just hope that spirit's gonna guide me and that I'm doing the right thing? Or, like, how did you handle those, I guess, dark night of the soul moments where it feels like, did you ever have a moment where you regretted your choice and thought that maybe you needed to go back home and just say, "I'm done with this"?
There were many moments like that. Um, For me, I was lucky I was on an island. I could go to the ocean. And I spent many days. Um, I think I mentioned it was a very beautifully strange existence. And because of lockdowns and travel restrictions, the beach areas were virtually empty in comparison to what it normally would be like. And that's what I was told by the locals. I have no comparison point because that was the only time I was there. But in retrospect, it became my medicine because I thought many times, oh my God, maybe I can't get there. Maybe I won't get there. At least I'm here, but I don't want to be here without her. And so it was a struggle. And so what I did was a lot of hydration. I ate a lot of avocados. I did a lot of reflection and a lot of drumming. I received, I didn't talk about this in the book, it just magically shows up, but I received a Navajo medicine drum from a medicine woman. And those experiences were so intimate and sacred that I didn't write it. But there were many afternoons that were burning the sage and drumming. It wasn't just me and the medicine woman. There were, a circle of us. And I didn't have to say I was bothered. I didn't have to say I didn't know where I was going to live or what I was going to do. I had the hospitality, but with hospitality, what's the time frame for that? How long does it go? Work strives on tourism on that island. Everything's closed. Where can you work then? Where are you going to live? How are you going to fly back? What are you going to do when you go home? Your tail's between your legs. Are you a failure because you made all these decisions and now you're the failed guy who said he's following God and now you're back home? Oh my God, I couldn't let that happen. But I didn't feel that that had to happen. But I embraced when that emotion came. And in many cases, they were long days of listening to the waves, writing poetry, and some messaging between me and Priska. And we got to know each other and discuss probably aspects of a relationship that you normally wouldn't have to confront before ever meeting. Because for whoever's listening right now, you'll realize when you read the introduction that me and the woman, Priska, who I was en route to, hadn't physically met yet. That's why that's another beautiful link to this whole story is it's all spirit led.
Yeah, that was part of one of the challenges you faced too, is because you hadn't met her in person, that caused a whole other mess of paperwork and strife that you had to work through. And so that's another good point to bring up too, is that you guys never actually met until you actually got to Switzerland. Obviously FaceTime and stuff, but it wasn't until then you met physically. And then so I guess with that, another question I like to ask is, and you kind of touched on it already too, like the last one, but what advice would you give somebody who is feeling that pull, feeling like they're going crazy, or they're just they're feeling like there's something else out there for them, and then that they're getting pulled on their own journey of some sort, whatever it might be. It could be, moving across state. It could just be finding a plot of land. It might, whatever that pull is for that person and their journey. Like, what advice would you give them?
One has only to know and trust, and the ageless guardians will appear. That is a quote from Joseph Campbell. And I live by that. My best advice is to follow your heart. It takes work to be able to hear what that is. You'll know whatever that is for you, whatever decision that is. I recommend trying breath work, meditation. I had been offering coaching. I still do. I've been pretty occupied with traveling and getting my book published, but I have kept some clients in the background. I specialize in 30-day coaching. That is based on the supposed fact, which I believe in, is 28 days to rewire any pattern
Hmm.
and to gain some routines and to really get confident and to really understand and clarify what direction it is you do want to go and for what reasons. Detox the mind, detox the body. I also can offer support for that. That is another layer that I don't even bring up in the book. I did mention that there's an international holistic company that I work with, and that is true. And so I incorporate that with coaching, different books to read, different practices, sound healing, incorporating all these things and really getting a steady routine and taking control of your energy. And then you will become better at understanding when something is coming into your field, that if it is yours or that if it is just something that's going to come and that it's going to go. Getting very comfortable and understanding your thought processes and how to better keep a positive mind. Neville Goddard comes to mind, that everything is working out for you. He's a part of my coaching. We all have people that we work with, and I would love to work with anyone that is in that position where to get that confidence to be able to step forward. And the service you're providing here to allow me to speak today, I'm very grateful for you in that you have others that come on here, because back in, you know, 5, 6 years ago, kind of like when I was mentioning, when a lot of my awakening started, is just to realize there were other people out there in a similar situation and that they had gotten through it, gave me such an inspiration. And I went and worked with many different people along the way. It wasn't just me meditating by myself, because that probably can work, but I needed support. I needed to talk with people. I needed to air some things out. And having some good, solid, trustful brothers there was very important for me in my journey. And I recommend, and my advice is to seek out people that you feel that are authentic. You probably hear that all the time, that authenticity is the new currency. And I believe that to be true. I've come across many along my way that inadvertently were not truly the what word fake in a way, but not all of them are intending to be fake. They're just misled. So I would suggest getting my book. You'll get a good feel for me, because it is a true story. And I am proof that all it takes is courage and faith, and all of your dreams can become your reality.
No, that's well said. And yeah, I mean, even I say it now, I've come to accept it, but this whole podcast thing was spirit led too. This was not anywhere in my state of being or anything that I ever wanted to do. But it was just one of those things that just you will do this. This is the podcast name. Here's some guests you're going to start with. Here's what it's about. And then it just started and it's been taken off since. And, getting people like yourself on, I think I've only had like two people say no just because of privacy concerns that they had with what they do and where they're living. They didn't want people to know. So I was like, okay, but I've yet to have anyone say no so far. And it's just like, all right, let's do this. And that's what it's really about, is to help others who are just starting on this journey realize that they're not crazy. Things are changing, and to find them the right person to work with. Because it's really about the right teacher. Like you said, the right authentic person for you. Someone working with you, they might enjoy your work better than, say, working with me or working with someone who does, human design or whatever else. They might find those insights when they listen to you talk and go, "Oh, that's exactly what I'm going through. I wanna work with someone who's been through what I've been through." That's really what it's about, and I will make sure all your websites, emails, whatever you wanna share with people get put into the show notes so that they can reach out to you when they have any questions or anything like that, and they can hopefully link up with you and go from there. Excuse me. One question, though, I did wanna touch on before we start wrapping things up, though. In the book, you mention a lot, at least in the beginning, you do. You kept seeing the feather and the elder shaman. Do you consider them to be kind of like your spirit guides, or is there a history there that you want to get into? I was just curious because it came up a lot and it felt
Right.
important, but I didn't understand the full context.
Okay. Um, it's twofold. There is a very understandable, and then the other one was part of me as a writer. Part of one of the concepts of writing is called style.
Mm,
And because I'm very visual and because I'm very led by dream and a shaman who, as you rightly spoke of, was a guide for me. And so, how do you write that? How do you write that and carry that through a portion of a book or a story or a series? So, for me, it was, how am I going to do this? So, that is how I did it. I would put the feather and the elder shaman dot dot dot, if they were speaking to me, because it was the guidance. And I believe it was at least somewhat from your feedback that you were picking up on that. Okay, there's something here. I'm not maybe exactly sure, but it's not confusing me. It's not taking away or distracting. It's there, and maybe I'm a little curious of what that is.
it felt like a
And then
spirit guide of some sort, but I wanted to make clarity on that. That's what yeah.
well, and I have a great example of this. So as I was preparing to, before I left my house, before I left my job, I was afraid I would be homeless, ironically. And I was afraid I would be hungry. I would be out of money. And I lived in South Milwaukee near Lake Michigan. And it was fall and getting cold. Wasn't quite cold yet, but by the water it was cold. So I had my backpack at the time. I had my backpack, the Thunderbird blanket I had at that time, and I had different items that I knew if I were to head out, I would need. There again is the experience from hunting. So I had a very good grasp on, okay, what are you going to need for sure, no matter what. So uh, not having food was more about not having the money. So at that time, I took what I knew I would have no matter what. And let's say I'm in my truck and I need to camp somewhere, and am I going to be cold or not? So I took that blanket and I was laying down in the sand behind some trees. And that's when I first encountered the shaman. And I still have some work to do with writing for me to properly describe how that shaman appeared to me. but one thing very distinct were many feathers. And the shaman helped me that night by asking me a series of questions on what I was truly afraid of. And it wasn't any of the things I was afraid of. It was just me afraid to make the choice to leave and to follow. And so that's when the shaman began to be a guide for me. And that's why I included in that way in my writing style in the book. And as you said in the beginning, very pronounced, because in the beginning were a lot of the tougher choices. And he would show up and the feathers were there. And plus, we're not giving too much away. We'll just say a feather is a symbol in the book, and that's why it's titled A Feather in Time. It is a matter of time, and the feathers were playing a part the whole time.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I thought. I just, since I have you here, it's like, let me clarify this.
Yeah,
And then,
well,
so speaking of the book, though, so it does say book one. We talked a little bit before recording. The first book is about your journey trying to get to Switzerland, trying to be with the love of your life. W- you've already touched on it with the interview of being there now, and now you're in Europe traveling around and everything. So, what do you think the second book's going to be about? More of life there, or in your journey to, I guess, assimilate? Because you kind of touched on it. You had to learn German. You had to do this. I lived in Europe for quite a while when I was younger, so I actually lived in Germany, and so I know some of the process of, to be able to work on the economy versus, working on the base. That's a whole different ball game. You need special permissions and visas, and you can't just show up in Europe and start working. It's not that it's not easy and it's not doable. You need to have the proper paperwork, just like we expect over here. You have to have the right paperwork to even stay in the country past 3 months, because everyone gets, at least it might have changed recently, but you get like a 3-month visa just to visit, and then after that, you need to have paperwork of some sort.
correct. Still, book one, rightfully put. Those who watch the podcast are going to realize, okay, I got there. Um, as I mentioned, I'm going to be revising the back cover because I've been advised to leave a little bit of mystery. Because for me, writing the book, as I already mentioned, was a big thanks to all those that did help. It was me to have the courage and to follow the guidance for things to even put myself in a position to receive. And I never expected things to be unfolded how they did. So, book one is about the journey and about trusting, about having courage and to clear the fear to free your dream. Book two is going to be about being there, being with her, learning language, learning about Switzerland. I mean, I knew there were the Swiss Alps. I knew they had cheese and chocolate, but I really didn't have any other clue. So, getting to feel those people. And once you read book one, you're going to come across so many different characters and people to really get a grasp that I do love connection. I love communicating with people. And it just carries through into Switzerland. And then also the history. There's cathedrals and stuff from 600. And so when you start to realize that, for me, it was very, very, very mind blowing to be around structures that were that old and looked beautiful. Book three is going to be Priska's journey because book one is about me on my way to her. And, you can maybe envision, a guy with a drum by a fire singing songs of freedom. Well, here's a woman in Switzerland with kind of her life together and everything, and she's noticing this guy singing songs about freedom. Well, what was it like for her? And what changes then did she go through? Because then book four is going to be about our travels together. And we didn't imagine that, but it's because of COVID. And again, we have to remember that. When I did get there, we had ideas. I was going to have my drum. She was a yoga teacher. We were going to have gatherings, and we were going to be doing healing. We were going to do sound healing. We were going to teach yoga. I was going to teach my breath work. I was going to do qigong. We were going to be there in service. But well, you can't have gatherings. All of a sudden, she couldn't teach yoga without wearing a mask, and she said, "I'm not teaching yoga wearing a mask. That's insane." So our life was inadvertently altered because of lockdowns, and then it changed our course of direction. And she also worked in a care home with the elderly, and she had to watch people do things to others because of the regulations in place, and she couldn't consciously, in her conscience, do that. So she left that job because it was, as we know now, um, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So there we were. All of a sudden, now here's a man and a woman. We're married, and now the whole idea in life that we had envisioned, it's up in smoke. Now what are you going to do? So it'll take a few books to get to that because it's really amazing and it continues. And as I told you today, something even just happened today. We've been where we are for a while, and now we're going to be going somewhere else. And this is all going to be written about, and I can't wait to share it because it is to live in your bliss, to live in your dream, to live in your freedom. It takes courage. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy. But the moments show up and you know it, you get the goosebumps and you'll feel it. A direction will unfold for you. It's getting clarity on what your dream is, keeping focused on that, carrying out those steady routines each and every day, and just solidifying the direction you're going no matter what happens on the external, because everything is working out for you. And when it clicks into place, you look and go, oh my God, now it all makes sense. It didn't while it might have been happening, but now I understand why that happened, why this person, why whatever it was. Now it all makes sense. And it is the most rewarding path there is when you continue to hold in your faith and to have that courage, and especially to have others to share with about that, and to have a good support group, to find those people that are authentic and to find those others that truly understand what it is to navigate an unseen brick road that you don't know what the next step is all the time. But when it shows up, you go, oh my God, I'm ready for this.
Yeah, and I think with that, that's actually a good spot to stop because I don't know. I have no more questions on them. I don't want to get too far into the book itself without giving too much away, but I do want to give you a chance if there's anything else about the book that you want to share that you haven't yet, or anything else about your journey in general. If you want to share anything about that, I do look forward to the next books because those do sound the story is interesting and the interesting saga of the whole thing and just to see where it lays out. Because, like I mentioned, it was like you get there and it's like, "Okay, what's next?" Like, I wanna learn about her stuff too because we hear about her, but we don't really know much about her, it's just you need to get to her, but we don't know what she's
Right.
going through. Because at one point, I'm not gonna lie, I'm like, "Well, why didn't she just fly to the States?" Like, would that be simpler? Would it just be easier for her to just come to you instead of everything you went through? But it sounds like there was the reason for it, that was the reason you needed to be there, not her to you.
Mhm. Uh, at some point, they'll all be written,
Mhm.
and then you can go from one book to the next. So I completely understand. I thank you for reading it, and don't be mad at me, but I'm glad you are very, very eager to get to the next one because that was very hard for me to leave like that. But I do know in the long run, the next book will be there and you can pick right up on from it. Because for listeners right now and for readers, when you read a book, um, it's not that me or authors, we sit down and just write the whole thing from page one to the end and then it's done. And we just every day punch in at 8 o'clock and at 4 o'clock, we're done. And then we pick up the next day. Everybody's got their own process. And likewise with mine, I was in a new country learning a new language, writing this story. So, um, getting that portion was very important because it is about the journey, because it's that first step in a longer vision than this particular portion of the entire journey is a journey within itself. But it was very important for me to give thanks to those that became a part of that journey and to make that transition, in your mid 40s, changing your entire life and having things show up that could give you doubts to turn back, but to have that resilience and that when you need whatever you need, it will show up, and to know that. And it takes a lot of work for that. So that was more of what book one is about that initial journey. And man, there was so much that I still didn't have in there, but I was very happy with what I did include. And I hope that you enjoyed reading through it and just kind of getting to experience all the different locations and different people I came across, because to me, that's what life is about, to experience other cultures, other belief systems, and to realize how common everything really is.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good book, and like I said before, there was these moments where I'm like, "Why are you doing that? Why are you going there?" And then things would just show up, and I'm like, "Did this really happen?" And then later on, it's like some person you met a couple chapters ago shows up again, and you're like, "All right, let's." You're just going for the ride, basically, because that's all you can do is, and which is what it seemed like you were doing. It was just, I'm just gonna keep going and see what happens, and then people just kept showing up, and then yeah, it definitely shows a lot of trust and spirit and people in general too, and all those people who, I guess, got the call, quote unquote, to come to a certain spot, to be there, to wait for you or to meet you, and having no clue why they're doing it. They had to give that trust over as well. So it's not even just about what you went through, it's about all those people you kind of collected along the way to help you, you know.
Well, I'm glad you see that, because for me, I began to understand the interconnected connectedness of not just me, not just my part in this, but to really truly be a witness to the orchestration of other things happening. And then when maybe not everybody realizes that, but I'm sure that happens in everybody's lives all the time. Maybe they're just not tuned into that. And that's why I did my best to write this from my perspective, because I believe other people have these moments where they notice things like that, and maybe they don't write about it. They're not going to journal it. Oh, it's another one of those things. They're like deja vu. Everybody, I mean, well, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people I know and talk to, they have had deja vu. They know what that is. There's these moments that just happen. And in this case, they kept happening. And it was because of that surrender factor. I had somewhere I could have fallen back to, but I consciously chose to leave all that. And I knew I had to honor that, because it took a lot of courage to do that. So I didn't have somewhere to fall back. There was only moving forward. And that's an element that can take on a life of its own. And in this case, it did.
Cool. And with that, I think it's a good spot to wrap it up. I do appreciate you coming on, man. I do appreciate the book. People should check it out. Again, I'm going to put your website, email, all your contact stuff that you want to share with people, and a link to the book so that they can purchase it if they want to. And then let me know when book two comes, and we can see about getting you back on and talk about it.
Will and Jeremy, man, thanks for doing what you're doing. And I want to give a shout out to Veronica Brower
Right?
out there for getting this together. She's a very special soul. And You know her, I know
Oh,
her. She's one of those people that are just like in my book. Like they are real people, and these angels and these fairies and these magical people are real out there.
yeah, she showed up to my house, like, we've been family friends for a while, like, she used to babysit my kids when they were younger. I've known Veronica for years, and she showed up with your book, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. She was like, "Oh, you gotta read this, blah, blah, blah," and I'm like, "Okay," and the way she made it sound was like she actually knew you and that you were in our town, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's kinda cool." Someone in our town that was homeless, working at the deli counter. I misinterpreted that it was in our town, but and I was like, "Alright, that's cool. I'll get to it. I'll look at it one day." And then we started the podcast, and then she posted something again about your book, and I'm like, "Maybe I should go ahead and check in and see what this book's about." And I started reading it, and I'm like, "Hey, Veronica, remember that guy you mentioned with the book? Hook me up with him." And then it just kinda took off. But again, one of those moments where things just kept showing up, and it's like, I guess I'll act on it, and we'll see what happens.
Per- You are correct, and she was correct. We were in Yelm for 3 months.
Huh,
This was just about a year ago. We showed up in Yelm last year in the beginning of December, all the way through to the end of February, and then we flew out. I didn't personally meet Veronica, but I did work at the Safeway in Yelm at the deli counter, and I met many amazing people in Yelm, and that will be a part of book 4. And so, do you see that I am not full of shit? These things actually happen, and when you are truly present each and every day, and you are connecting with each person that you come in contact with, things happen. Just a matter of fact, Debbie, who I worked with at the deli, messaged me 2 days ago and said, "Jake, um, you know, I really miss you. It was great. I love your book. I just finished it, and it was funny. And you've read it, so that's something that happens, right? Well, Debbie goes to tell me, yeah, I'm driving down the road, and something told me, here, this guy's walking. Maybe I should stop. I wouldn't normally have done that, but because I read your book, something told me it would be okay. So she slows down. Come to find out, this guy was a cyclist and his tire popped on his bike, and he left it because he had a long ways to walk. So she gives him a ride. Then she discovers his name is Carl, who I met while I was at the deli staying with my other friend who lives right next to her. And she messaged me to say, "Oh my God, you won't believe who I just came in contact with." And it's this thing that happens. So here you are now in Yelm, and we're talking about it. So there's just another verification that, as much as some of these things that happen in this book might sound like they're made up, they're not.
yeah, which is crazy because I go to that deli once a week, so I probably bought lots of food from you without even realizing it.
Yeah. I was the guy always talking up the cheese that tastes the onion cheese.
Not sure on that one, I'll be honest. I don't normally get the cheese too much from there. I usually just went for the Black Forest ham or the ham off the bone because that's what the kids would eat.
Yeah, I'm sure I probably cut meat for you too. Oh my God, so cool. Yeah, so that's to clarify. We were staying with another friend. I will say that he is the fairy night king. That's going to be how I name him. He's a real person, and I literally know people are going to think I'm making things up because he sounds like he's an elven magic crystal knight from some fantasy land, but he lives right in Yelm in a cabin in the woods, probably similar to you, with many acres, with animals. And I learned so much, and I'm not going to even talk about anything more of it because I can't. I wish I could write faster and get these other books out of the way to get to those things, because the the rewards of following your heart are they're indescribable.
Yeah, funny thing is I probably know who he is without even saying his name, but Yelm's it's one of those towns where you wouldn't think it's very spiritual or has a lot going on. It's just kind of like a really small farm town that's been growing because of the base, but there's a lot going on here. It's been very interesting, and that's even us moving here was kind of one of those synchronistic points, I guess you could call it, or moments of spirit without even realizing it. It was like we got stationed here when I was in the military. It was, "Oh, you can go to Texas or you can go to Washington." Being from Germany, I was like, "Well, let's go to Washington. My wife will be more comfortable there because she's German." And then we get here and it's like, "Well, where do you wanna live?" I was like, "Well, I don't wanna live in these big cities around here. Let's find something that's more like a small Bavarian village," and best we could get was, Yelm at the time that was still close enough to the base. But we've just stayed here and all the people I've met since then just building that community. It's been great.
Awesome.
All right. Well, again, I appreciate it. Yeah, let me know when the next one comes out and we'll do this again and go up from there, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Shaman Stories podcast. If you have any interest in the services that I provide or the services of my guest, please click the link in the show notes below. Thank you. And until next time, have a good journey.